What if I told you that turning 30 in the year 2030 might cost you more than buying a house did for your parents? What if the simple act of existing as a 30-year-old will require financial gymnastics that would make an Olympic athlete weep? Well, buckle up because the numbers I'm about to share with you will either motivate you to start planning now or send you into an existential crisis about avocado toast being a luxury item. My name is Nick, and I spend an unhealthy amount of time researching financial trends and economic projections so you don't have to. If you're someone who actually wants to understand what your financial future looks like, instead of just hoping everything magically works out, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if the information helps you prepare for what's coming. Here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. By 2030, the average cost of simply being 30 years old in America will require an annual income that most people today would consider wealthy. We're not talking about living lavishly or buying designer everything. We're talking about the basic cost of housing, transportation, food, healthcare, and maybe having enough left over to occasionally enjoy life without checking your bank account first. Most people look at inflation numbers and think, oh, 3% per year doesn't sound too bad. What they don't realize is that 3% compounded over several years creates a financial tsunami that will reshape how an entire generation lives, works, and plans for the future. The millennials and Gen Z who are entering their prime earning years right now are about to face a cost of living crisis that makes today's housing market look like a clearance sale. Let's start with the big kahuna that keeps everyone awake at night. Housing. By 2030, the average single-family home in America is projected to cost approximately $382,000. Now, before you start thinking that doesn't sound completely insane, remember that this is the national average. This includes homes in places where the most exciting local attraction is a gas station that stays open past 9 p.m. In the markets where people actually want to live and work, the numbers become genuinely terrifying. Hawaii is expected to see average home prices reach over $1.4 million. That's not a typo. $1.4 million for an average home in Hawaii. California's housing market is projected to exceed $1 million for the average home, which means buying a house in Los Angeles or San Francisco will require the kind of money that previous generations associated with buying small businesses or private jets. But here's where it gets really interesting, and by interesting, I mean soul-crushingly expensive. The monthly cost of homeownership is approaching $4,000 per month when you factor in mortgage payments, insurance, property taxes, and maintenance. $4,000. That's more than many people's entire take-home pay right now, and it's just for keeping a roof over your head. The rental market isn't offering much relief either. Currently, renting a typical single-family home costs around $2,300 per month, and that number is climbing steadily. By 2030, renting might be the only viable option for most 30-year-olds, which creates its own set of problems because you're essentially paying someone else's mortgage while building zero equity for yourself. Now, you might be thinking, well, at least I can get a good education to increase my earning potential. Oh, sweet summer child, let me introduce you to the educational cost explosion that's coming. If current trends continue, annual public college tuition will reach approximately $44,000 by 2030. Public college, the supposedly affordable option that guidance counselors use to recommend to save money. A 4-year degree from a public university could cost over $200,000 total by 2030. Private universities are looking at crossing the $100,000 annual threshold, which means 4 years at a private school could cost more than most people's houses did 20 years ago. Some of the most expensive institutions are already approaching this milestone, with universities like USC and the University of Chicago potentially hitting six-figure annual costs by 2026. The math on education financing becomes genuinely absurd when you break it down. A student earning minimum wage would need to work 40 hours per week just to cover tuition and room and board. 40 hours per week. That's a full-time job just to pay for school before accounting for books, supplies, living expenses, or the occasional meal that doesn't come from a vending machine. Let's talk about healthcare, because apparently staying alive is also becoming a luxury service. Healthcare costs are projected to increase by about 20% by 2030, which means medical care that costs $5,000 today could easily cost $6,000 in just a few years. Medicare spending is expected to grow at an average rate of 7.2% annually, which is the fastest growth rate among major payers. For those lucky enough to have employer-provided health insurance, you're looking at potentially paying $2,400 per year for single coverage and nearly $9,000 annually for family coverage. That's money coming directly out of your paycheck before you even see it. Companies are projected to spend over $18,000 per employee just for health insurance coverage by 2026, costs that inevitably get passed along to workers through lower wages or higher deductibles. The really fun part about healthcare costs is that they're driven by factors completely outside your control. An aging workforce is using more medical services, new expensive treatments are constantly being developed, and prescription drug costs continue climbing faster than a SpaceX rocket. Insurance companies are already assuming medical costs will increase by 7 to 8% annually, which means your healthcare expenses will double approximately every 9 years. Transportation costs are joining the party with their own special brand of financial chaos. While electric vehicles are expected to become more affordable, reaching around 16,000 euros by 2030, the overall cost of transportation is still climbing. Car ownership expenses, including gas, repairs, maintenance, parking, insurance, and licensing, have increased by 43% since 2019. Car insurance alone has seen price increases of over 19% year over year, making it one of the biggest contributors to overall inflation. The average repair bill for a traditional car is now over $4,000, and for electric vehicles, it's even higher at around $6,600. This means that even if you manage to buy a car, keeping it running will require setting aside significant money for maintenance and repairs. Car insurance has become so expensive that it's contributing more to inflation than almost any other single factor. Food costs are also preparing to take a bigger bite out of your budget. With an average annual inflation rate of over 2%, grocery and dining costs are expected to rise by approximately 26% by 2030. That grocery trip that costs $250 today could easily cost over $300 in just a few years. Food prices are rising faster than overall inflation, with some items like orange juice up 31% and ground beef up 17% year over year. The cruel irony is that households with lower incomes spend a much higher percentage of their total budget on food. For the lowest income households, food costs can represent over 30% of after-tax income, while wealthy households spend only about 8% of their income on food. This means that food inflation hits hardest exactly where people can least afford it. And there is a brutal irony here that we need to talk about. Technology was supposed to make everything cheaper and more efficient, but instead, it's actually making life more expensive. Your smartphone, which you absolutely need for work, banking, and basic social functioning, now costs over $1,000 and needs to be replaced every few years. Your internet bill has become as essential as electricity and keeps climbing because providers know you can't live without it. But the real killer is the subscription economy, which has quietly become a financial vampire that's sucking money out of your account every month. Streaming services that once cost $8 are now $15 to $20 each, and you need 3 of them just to watch what your friends are talking about. Software you used to buy once now requires monthly payments. Your car might even need a subscription for heated seats. These $10 and $20 charges seem small individually, but they add up to hundreds or thousands of dollars a year for services that used to be one-time purchases. Companies have created a financial ecosystem where you are trapped paying monthly fees for the rest of your life just to maintain access to things you thought you owned. Now, here's where this story gets really interesting, and it's something that most financial advisors don't want to talk about because it's genuinely depressing. The average millennial salary today hovers around $71,000 per year. Sounds pretty decent, right? Well, here's the problem. That income level, which feels manageable today, will be completely inadequate by 2030. While costs are exploding in every direction, wages are doing their best impression of a sloth on sedatives. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York discovered something absolutely brutal. The median wage earner doesn't see any earnings growth after age 35. Zero. Meanwhile, the cost of everything they need to survive is increasing by 3 to 8% annually. It's like trying to fill a bathtub while someone else is drilling holes in the bottom faster than you can pour water in. Real wages have already fallen 7.6% since 2006, which means people are actually earning less purchasing power than they were nearly 2 decades ago. Millennials who experienced career delays during various economic disasters won't reach their peak earning years until much later in life, assuming they ever reach them at all. By the time they hit their stride financially, the cost of living will have lapped them 3 times around the track. Here's where the math becomes genuinely terrifying. If you're making $50,000 today and inflation continues at 4% annually, you'll need the equivalent of $162,000 in 30 years just to maintain the same standard of living. That's more than tripling your income just to break even. Most people struggle to get a 3% annual raise, let alone the kind of income growth required to keep pace with these projections. The side hustle economy has become less of an opportunity and more of a survival mechanism. 55% of Gen Z and millennials now have side hustles, earning an extra $13,000 to $18,000 annually just to make ends meet. This isn't about building wealth or pursuing passion projects. This is about working multiple jobs just to afford the basics that previous generations could cover with a single income. Even geography can't save you from this financial apocalypse. Massachusetts offers the highest average millennial salary at $108,000, but it's still not enough to comfortably afford the projected costs of living there by 2030. Meanwhile, states like Mississippi offer the lowest millennial salaries at around $58,000, which will make basic survival a genuine challenge as costs continue climbing. The retirement picture makes everything else look like a gentle warm-up act. Current projections suggest that someone retiring in 2030 will need between $350,000 to $400,000 saved just to cover healthcare costs during retirement. Not total retirement expenses, just healthcare. That's assuming Social Security still exists in its current form, which is about as certain as finding a parking spot at the mall during Christmas shopping season. Inflation doesn't just make everything more expensive today, it completely destroys retirement planning for anyone who doesn't account for its compounding effects. Even if you save diligently throughout your career, inflation can turn what seemed like adequate retirement savings into barely enough to cover basic expenses. The purchasing power of money erodes so dramatically over time that today's comfortable nest egg becomes tomorrow's poverty-level income. The psychological impact of these projections cannot be understated. Entire generations are looking at a future where homeownership is impossible, education is financially ruinous, healthcare is bankrupting, and retirement is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The American dream isn't just becoming expensive, it's becoming mathematically impossible for most people to achieve. Young adults today are making financial decisions based on a reality that no longer exists. They're told to save 10 to 15% of their income for retirement, but that advice assumes costs will remain relatively stable, when housing alone could consume 60 to 70% of someone's income by 2030. Traditional financial planning becomes about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The ripple effects extend far beyond individual finances. When an entire generation cannot afford to buy homes, the real estate market faces a demographic cliff. When people cannot afford to have children because the cost of raising them is prohibitive, birth rates plummet. When education becomes so expensive that only the wealthy can access it, social mobility disappears entirely. Consumer spending, which drives the American economy, faces a fundamental shift. Instead of discretionary purchases driving economic growth, People will be forced to spend almost everything they earn on basic necessities. The luxury of choice in spending disappears when survival consumes your entire budget. Credit markets are already showing strain as people borrow more money just to maintain their current lifestyle. Credit card debt averages over $9,000 per household, and that's before the real cost increases hit. When basic living expenses require borrowing money, debt becomes not just common, but essential for survival. The generational wealth gap will become a chasm by 2030. Older generations who purchased homes when they were affordable will see their property values skyrocket, creating massive wealth through no effort of their own. Meanwhile, younger generations will spend their entire working lives paying rent to these same property owners, transferring wealth upward while building none for themselves. Geographic mobility, once a hallmark of American opportunity, becomes impossible when moving costs more than most people earn annually. Young adults will become trapped in whatever location they can initially afford, unable to relocate for better opportunities because the cost of moving exceeds their financial capacity. The social contract that promised hard work would lead to prosperity is being rewritten in real time. The new contract appears to be that hard work might allow you to survive, but prosperity requires either extraordinary luck or family wealth. Merit-based advancement becomes secondary to financial inheritance and existing wealth accumulation. But here's the thing that makes this entire situation even more challenging than it appears on paper, and it's something that almost nobody talks about when discussing future costs. The psychological warfare that inflation wages on your brain makes rational financial planning nearly impossible. When everything costs more every single month, your financial goals become moving targets that seem to accelerate away from you faster than you can chase them. It's like trying to hit a bullseye while someone keeps moving the target farther away and making it smaller. Consider the mental gymnastics required just to budget for groceries in this environment. You walk into the store with a list based on last month's prices, only to discover that your usual shopping trip now costs $30 more than expected. Multiply this experience across every category of spending, and you're essentially budgeting for a ghost economy that exists only in your outdated assumptions about what things should cost. The stress of constant price increases creates a scarcity mindset that actually makes financial problems worse. People start hoarding cash because they're terrified of spending money, but holding cash during high inflation is like trying to preserve ice cubes in a furnace. The money loses value faster than you can save it, which means the very act of being financially responsible in traditional ways becomes financially destructive. Young adults today are developing completely different relationships with money than previous generations. They're not saving for down payments on houses because houses cost more than their lifetime earnings. They're not planning traditional retirements because retirement, as their grandparents knew it, simply won't exist. Instead, they're optimizing for flexibility and survival, treating financial planning like disaster preparedness rather than wealth building. The dating and relationship landscape faces its own financial apocalypse by 2030. The traditional life milestones that people use to measure relationship readiness become impossible to achieve. Moving in together stops being about love and commitment and becomes purely about splitting rent to afford basic housing. Having children transforms from a natural life progression into a luxury purchase that requires extensive financial planning and probably generational wealth transfer from parents. Childcare costs deserve their own special mention in this parade of financial horrors. The average cost of full-time childcare already exceeds the cost of college tuition in most states. By 2030, expect to pay between $25,000 and $35,000 annually per child for decent daycare or preschool. For couples who want to start families, this creates impossible mathematical equations. Two people might be able to afford their own living expenses on a combined income of $100,000, add a child to the mix, and suddenly they need $150,000 or more just to break even. Many couples are discovering that it's actually cheaper for one parent to stop working entirely rather than pay for childcare, which obviously reduces household income and creates its own financial pressures. Marriage itself becomes a financial strategy rather than a romantic choice. Two people earning $60,000 each might barely survive individually, but together they could potentially afford a decent apartment and maybe even save for emergencies. The economics of partnership override personal compatibility because survival requires dual incomes just to achieve what single incomes provided previous generations. Social dynamics shift dramatically when basic adult milestones become financially impossible. The 30-year-old still living with roommates isn't necessarily immature or unsuccessful. They might simply be making the only rational economic choice available to them. The stigma traditionally associated with certain living arrangements disappears when those arrangements become the norm rather than the exception. The gig economy stops being about entrepreneurial freedom and becomes about economic necessity. Multiple income streams aren't lifestyle choices anymore. They're survival strategies. The person driving for 3 different apps while freelancing graphic design and selling crafts online isn't pursuing passion projects. They're assembling enough income sources to possibly afford rent and groceries in the same month. Career planning becomes almost impossible when the jobs that exist today might not exist tomorrow, and the jobs that will exist tomorrow require skills that don't exist today. The traditional advice to pick a stable career and stick with it becomes laughably outdated when stability itself becomes the rarest commodity in the job market. The concept of work-life balance disappears entirely when life becomes work. The 40-hour work week transforms into whatever number of hours are required to afford basic survival, which increasingly means working constantly. The side hustle isn't supplemental income, it's the difference between making rent and becoming homeless. Educational debt creates a particularly cruel irony in this economic landscape. People borrow massive amounts of money to get degrees that supposedly increase their earning potential, but by the time they graduate, the cost of living has increased faster than their improved earning capacity. They're better educated and deeper in debt, with no net improvement in their ability to afford basic life necessities. The mental health implications of this financial pressure cannot be ignored. Anxiety and depression rates among young adults are skyrocketing, and financial stress is a major contributing factor. When basic survival requires constant vigilance and multiple income sources, relaxation becomes impossible. The chronic stress of financial insecurity creates health problems that further increase healthcare costs, creating a vicious cycle of declining health and increasing expenses. Social safety nets designed for previous economic realities become inadequate for current challenges. Unemployment benefits based on traditional employment models don't help gig workers with fluctuating incomes. Healthcare tied to full-time employment doesn't serve people working multiple part-time jobs. Housing assistance programs designed for different cost structures don't address current market realities. The family formation patterns that previous generations took for granted become impossible luxuries. Having children requires not just love and commitment, but substantial financial resources that most young adults simply don't possess. The cost of childcare often exceeds rent, making working parenthood economically irrational for many families. This creates demographic challenges that ripple through every aspect of society. Consumer culture faces a fundamental reckoning when consumption becomes unaffordable. The economy built on people buying things they don't need with money they don't have collapses when people can barely afford things they absolutely need. Retail businesses designed around discretionary spending face extinction when discretionary income disappears. So there you have it. Being 30 in 2030 will cost more than most people make today. And the American dream is getting a price tag that reads like a phone number. The math is brutal, the projections are terrifying, and avocado toast really might become a luxury item. But here's the thing. Knowing what's coming gives you the power to prepare for it. Start planning now, because your future 30-year-old self will either thank you for taking action today or wonder why you spent so much time binge-watching videos instead of building wealth. The choice is yours, but time definitely isn't on your side.